Okay, I would like to get started. Just going to share my presentation, just a moment. There we go. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that results officer training slide. So welcome. I know you're in the middle of or at the beginning of another T8 in Hong Kong, so hopefully you're all tucked away safely at home and not being blown around and being rained on too much. Hopefully this storm isn't too bad. So I've put everyone on mute at the moment, just because there's quite a large group. What I plan to do is to stop at several moments, several times during this presentation, so that we can have questions on the section I've just covered. Okay, so I hope that's fine. And a little bit about myself. So I'm Brenda Davis, and I am now in the UK. Just too difficult with family and COVID restrictions to be in Hong Kong at the moment. I've got 3 daughters studying over in the UK. But I think quite a few of you probably know me anyway. I was working at the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club, looking at race management for about 5 years. And I have my international race officer qualification that came through about a year ago. So, and I'm continuing to do lots of race management over in the UK. I just ran the Moth Inland Nationals this last weekend, which was quite exciting and fun. But welcome, thank you. It's a great turnout for this, or sign up for this seminar. We haven't run a results officer one for a couple of years. So it's good to see lots of new faces and people wanting to get involved in running the racing at the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club. Okay, what I plan to do is just set the scene. So this, again, it's all focused on being a results officer for the class racing at the Royal Hong Kong. Each class has to do their race management duty, and starting off by being a results officer is a good place to begin. So I just like to set the scene about what the club documents are that govern our racing, and also what race management resources there are available to you through the club website. Then I'm going to move on to just running through flags and signals. This may be familiar to some of you, to others maybe not so. I think it's good to have an understanding of what all these flags mean when you're on the race management team, so you know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And then lastly, going into some specific tasks that you may be asked to do if you are on the team as a results officer. Okay. So we start at the beginning of the race document. So World Sailing is the body that governs the sport of sailing, and they produce the racing rules of sailing, which are refreshed every 4 years. So the current ones run from 21 to 24. Okay, I'm just going to see if we've got any more people wanting to join us. Just hold with me, bear with me for a moment. No, I don't think there's anyone waiting in the waiting room. Let me just double check. No, okay. So the presentation is running away from me. So we go back to the racing rules of sailing. So if you were to race in Hong Kong or in England or America, the racing should be run according to the worldwide racing rules of sailing. Sometimes we have to make slight adjustments for a specific event or a specific location, but on the whole, this set of rules governs the sport all over the world, and we try to adhere to as closely as we can to these rules as possible. Okay. And you can pick up a copy of that at the ship shop, and there are also various online versions available. Okay, so the club, if you go to the Royal Hong Kong website under the sailing tab, there's a race management section, and here we try to put all kinds of information which will be useful to our race management teams. And if we sort of look a little further into that, we have a section that has our club standard sailing instructions. And under that, there's also a sheet with all the flag signals that you might find. And these are actually, when you're on the various committee boats, there will be laminated sheets with all these flag signals as a nearby to hand, so that if you're in doubt about what a flag means or how many sounds it goes up with or down with, it's there as a handy reference guide. And we also have what we call our race management guidelines. So we have a set for the harbour racing, and we also have a set that covers racing held out of Middle Island, Shelter Cove, and over at Lama, so our geometric and dinghy racing. And there are a variety of other guidelines in there, lots of information. And you might notice at the bottom, there's the RYA race management guidelines. The RYA is the Royal Yachting Association, and they set a pretty high benchmark for race management. So if you really want to get into a detailed level, you can always go and have a look at the RYA's guidelines as well. Okay, so we have our standard sailing instructions, and we update these every 4 years to match the cycle with the updates to the racing rules of sailing. So the last update was at the beginning of this year, and these cover pretty much all of the usual class racing held at the club. So we're not writing a new set of sailing instructions for every race. We would go back to these standard sailing instructions to cover probably 90% of racing at the club. And inside there are 3 sections. So we've got the part 1 covering racing in the harbour. Part 2, we call our geometric courses. So that's sort of dragons and sports boats, J80s, you know, racing out of Middle Island or Lama or up at Port Shelter. And then we've got our part 3, which is specifically dinghy racing, which is held out of Middle Island. Okay. At the end of the standard sailing instructions, we've got various appendices that cover the club's use of marine radios, when to wear your life jackets, and also if you're racing in the Lama racetrack and you're coming out of Middle Island, how to get boats safely across the Lama Channel. Okay, and then we also have various appendices D through M, and each one of these is for a specific class. And it may be that, say, the sports boats only want to do a 1-turn penalty instead of a 2-turn. So if we've got any specific class tweaks, we will include in their appendix. And these aren't published in the printed book. They're only on the website because they are updated quite regularly. So it's a living document. So we don't print them, but they're available on the website. And if we have to make any change to the actual printed SIs, we'll put this up. It's called a notice to competitors. That's just the formal language. It's basically a document that says this has changed and it's effective. This change is effective from a specific date, and you'll find all of those on the club website. So just to go through this, so we've got our racing rules, and then we've got our club standard sailing instructions. So if you're going to go out to race or be on a race management team, it's always good to maybe have read through the documents which will be governing that racing, just so that you've got an idea of what will be happening on the day. Okay, the race management guidelines, they're fairly, well, they are detailed sets of help, and they're really aimed at race officers, but as a results officer, it's always useful to know what's going on. And they basically cover the things that you would need to do before your duty as a race officer, things you'll need to think about preparing the week before and on the morning of the race. And then there's also, once racing, once you go out on the committee boat, there's a sort of a sequence, a timeline of tasks that you'll need to do to make sure that you don't miss anything. It's about when you know, how long you spend course setting, when you should think about putting the orange flag up, and I'll go into this in a bit more detail. But there's a timeline there to help you the week before, the morning of, once you're on the committee boat, once racing's underway, all the things you sort of need to have done or to be thinking about. Okay, there's also a section about the various courses and also how to choose which course to set for different classes. There's a picture showing how you should set up the flags on the committee boat. I mean, the coxswains will be very helpful with this, but there's sort of a recommended layout of flags. And the idea is to make the flags easily seen by the sailors. So, you know, just a good moment to think, always look at things from the sailor's perspective, not just from the race management perspective. There's also guidance on how long starting lines should be. You know, if you've got 18 etchels, we've done the maths for you, it's all there. The finishing codes like DNF for did not finish, DNS for did not start, there's a handy reference sheet for that. And there's also a list of what you will find in the race officer bag. So the club is very well kitted out and will provide you with a race officer bag and various equipment needed, all the forms you need. So you really don't need to bring anything along with you. I mean, unless you've got your favorite watch, you know, sailing watch to help with timing, but you know, or your favorite pencil or whatever, but the club will provide all the kit that you will need. Okay, so a bit more information on finding out what information there is for a specific class. If you know that you're going to be running or helping with racing for this example, it's the Impalas. So you go on the website, drill into the Impala page, and there's a bit of blurb about what they are. And underneath that blurb, there'll be a list of all the notices of races, which will be in effect for the season. So our season runs from September through to May, and basically you'll find all the notices of races. Obviously the ones which aren't yet written will not be up there, but all the live links. And if you drill down into that a bit more, this is an example of the Impala notice of race covering most of their series this year. And we've got a routine format, so you'll be able to look in section 3 under the schedule. You know, on the 4th of September, they were running race 1 in the autumn series. It tells you they're only doing one race that day, and the warning signal time, it was 13:57. So all the information governing all the classes you can find through their notices of races on their class page. Okay, I'm just going to pause at the moment and just see if we've got anyone else waiting to come in. Okay. So can I ask, does anyone have any questions so far? I've allowed you now, if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask. Nope. Okay. So I will move on. Okay. So this is an example of the flag signal sheet. So I just want to run through what the various flags mean, because it's always good to know each one has a specific meaning, and there's usually a time linked to the display or the removal of that flag. So it looks a little bit daunting to start with, but it's there is a process and you'll get familiar with it. So the first flag we need to think about is the orange flag. That is also called the attention signal. And we aim to have that up. The rules say, oh, there's someone else coming in, just a moment. Okay. We aim to get that flag displayed at 5 minutes before the first warning signal. It can be more than 5 minutes, but it has to be at least 5 minutes. And I find it's always good practice if you can have it at the 5 minutes, then people can start to set their watches based on that. And it also, the attention signal, it's sort of a wake up signal to the team, the sailors, that a start sequence is going to be happening soon. And if you have maybe 3 or 4 classes starting in a sequence, you'll just put the orange flag up at the beginning of that sequence. You won't take it up and down for each class. Okay. The orange flag also defines the committee boat end of the starting line. So technically it's the pole that the flag is on is the end of the starting line. So it's 2 meanings. It's a wake up signal, 5 minutes to the warning signal, and then it's also one end of the start line. Okay. So on the right, these are all the class flags that we use at the club. Okay. So these are the ones used for the regular class racing. Sometimes for our bigger events, we might have to change the flags a bit, but for regular class racing, the Dragons always have a D flag, Etchells, a G flag, etc. And when this flag goes up with a sound, that means it's the warning signal. It's 5 minutes to that class's start. Okay, so when the D goes up for the Dragons, it's 5 minutes till the Dragon start. Okay, and hopefully the other boats who might be racing as well will give the Dragons space on their start line. Okay, the next flag that you will see in the class racing is the P, the preparatory flag, and this will go up at 4 minutes to the start. And then that comes down with a long sound signal at 1 minute to the start. Okay, and then at the start, the class flag is taken down with 1 signal. Sorry, Helen's just asking if we're going to have a copy of the slides. Yes, we will. Okay. Okay, so just to run through, the orange flag will go up 5 minutes before a warning signal. So that's effectively 10 minutes before a start. And then the class flag will go up, that's 5 minutes to the start. The P goes up 4 minutes to the start. The P comes down 1 minute to the start, and the class flag comes down at the start. Okay. If any boats are over, we've got 2 options for recall flags. So if the race officer can identify which boats are over, they will call individual recall and the cell numbers, and the X flag goes up with a sound. And the X flag stays up until those boats which were over the line have come back and restarted properly. If they don't come back, the X flag remains flying for 4 minutes and then is taken down. And when it comes down, there's no sound signal, because you might be in a sequence for the next class, and if the X came down with a sound, that might be confusing. Okay. If lots of boats are over and the race officer is not sure they've caught all of the ones who are over, they may call a general recall. And then this triangular blue and yellow flag is called the first substitute. That will go up with 2 sounds. Okay, and what that does, it sort of puts a pause on all the racing for the next fleets. The class that had the general recall has to come back to the start, and when that blue and yellow triangular flag comes down with with 1 sound, basically the class flag for that recall class will go up 1 minute later, and that will be their new warning signal. Okay. We tend to, we don't put the recalled classes back to the end of the start sequence. We just go straight again with their a second attempt of their start. Okay. Right, I'm going through this quite quickly. There's lots of information about it on the website, but I just wanted to sort of make everyone aware of what the beginnings of what these flags all mean. So other flags you may see, sort of the cat in the hat flag, I call it, the AP, will go up with 2 sound signals, and basically that's a postponement. So you can put the AP up before a start, and it basically pauses everything and allows you to reset. So you might AP if there was a problem with your start line, or the wind had gone strange, or for whatever reason, you can put that up before a start and it pauses everything. And when it comes down, it means there'll be a warning signal in 1 minute's time. Okay, so it's like a reset button. And then we have the checkered flag, the N flag. So this is used mainly after the start. So if for some reason you have to abandon a race, that will go up with 3 sound signals. And similarly, when it's lowered with 1 sound, the new warning signal will be 1 minute later. Yeah, I'm not going to go into these in too much depth, but just so you're aware, the AP tends to be used before a start, and that's your reset. And the N flag is the abandon flag, and that tends to be used after a start to also let you do a reset. Okay. And both of those flags can be put over an H flag or an A flag. H, if it's over the H, it usually means everyone should go home, go ashore, and there might be more signals ashore. So you unlikely to be used in the class racing, but it's there as an option. More likely, if you decide that there's not going to be any more racing today, you would put the AP over an A, and that says races are postponed, there's no more racing today. Or if you have the N over the A, so you'd put that up, a race is in progress, but you want to abandon it and send everyone home. That may be for a safety reason, for bad weather or something like that. Okay, so just to be aware, you can have the AP over an H or an A, and also the abandon flag over an H or an A. You're more likely to see in the class racing that we're using them with the A flag to stop the racing in progress, or to not proceed with racing for some reason, and also to tell the sailors there will be no more racing that day. Okay, just moving on, blue flag. This used to be that the committee boat was just in position at the finish. It was changed in the racing rules for 2021. The blue flag actually now defines one end of the finishing line. Okay, so the pole with the blue flag is the committee boat end of the finish line. And then if we have to shorten course, we have the Sierra flag, the S flag, blue square in the middle of a white square, and that goes up with 2 sound signals. And the S flag means the course is shortened, and it actually, the pole that is flying the S flag is one end of the shortened finish line. Okay. Right. Can I ask if anyone has any questions? So I see.
Sorry, just on the last slide, I was getting a bit lost with the dots. What?
Okay, the dots mean the number of sound signals.
Right. Okay, got you. Thanks.
Yeah, so 1 dot, 1 sound signal, and if it's an elongated dot, then it's a long sound signal. Yeah. Now, the sound signals are there as a helpful measure, but it's the timing is from the flags. Okay, so the sailors must look at the flags, and the timing of the flags has to be right. If for whatever reason a sound signal isn't made, it actually under the rules doesn't matter, except with the individual recall. When the X flag goes up, there has to be a sound signal. Okay, but I don't want to get too deep into the nuances of signals, but just to give you an overview. And I see there's a question: are these flags universal? Yes, they are. They are the so the alpha, they're alphabetically A to Z, and then you've got your numeral pennant 0 to 9, and you've got the first, second, third substitutes. They are universal flags. The flags that we choose for our classes, so they're a universal flag, but the D flag doesn't mean it's a class flag for dragons all over the world, okay? But the actual flags and the letter names are universal. Okay, any more questions? Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna have a bit of tea. Okay, so now really looking more at the things that you'll have to do and prepare as a results officer. Okay, so you will no doubt your class secretary will have encouraged you to sign up for your duty, and then you'll be on Dillis's list. And each class runs racing about every 7 weeks or so for all the other classes. And so you'll get an email from Dillis in the sailing office, and she'll be telling you, just reminding you of when and which race area you're going to be working on. She'll also say who else is on that team, on that race management team, and when and where you should meet them. You should also be told which committee boat you'll be on and the contact number for that boat, just in case you can't find them for whatever reason. She'll also say how many classes are racing and how many races they're doing on that day, and roughly what time it will be finished. But of course, with sailing, it's it's a bit variable, as we all know. And she'll also give you a set of notes about what you will have to do as your as a results officer. So this is a good moment. You'll get this at least the week before. If you've got any questions about the duty, it's a good moment to get in touch with Dillis and just make sure that you're clear on what you'll be doing. Okay, we have different sizes of teams depending on where the racing is going to be held. So if it's going to be in the harbour, there'll be a race officer, the assistant race officer, that's the ARO, and 3 or maybe 4 results officers. And often you might be put into 2 different teams. So you'll have one team that stays on the main committee boat, and that would probably be the results officer and the race officer and 2 results officers. You'll also have the coxswain, 2 coxswain on board there to help with the signals, the flags, and the timing. And then you may be put on a finish boat in the harbour, probably with the ARO and 1 or 2 results officers. And what this means is when we're in the harbour, we may have up to 5 classes racing, some doing 2 races, some doing 1 race. And having 2 separate teams means that you can start and finish a race in different places without having to move the main committee boat. Okay, but the RO will decide what he or she would like, and so just to be aware that you might be on the main committee boat, or you might be asked to jump onto a second committee boat. And if you're racing out of Shelter Cove and Middle Island, we tend to have one race officer and maybe one or two results officers. When it's not such a, we won't have so many classes racing, it's not quite as complicated, so it's a smaller team. And if there's one class racing, you may be the only results officer. If there are two classes, then there may be a second results officer with you. Okay. And so you may be asked to help with wind recording, checking the sign-on of boats, last minute recording, and recording mark roundings or finishes, and then helping get the results pulled together. And I'll run through each of these as we go. So try your best to be neat, at least be legible. I tend to use pencil, but pen is fine, but just try and be clear. And you'll be given a series of forms and try and fill out all the sections on the form. So we'll go through some of the forms in a moment. And if there is an error, just tend to cross it out rather than erase it, because you may find actually the information you first write down is correct. And if you've rubbed it out, then we've lost all record of that. Okay, so just try to cross out and make the corrections neatly nearby. And always look at what you've written. Will it make sense to anyone else? You know, so in 2 days' time, when the sailing officer is trying to pull the official results together, will they have a chance of understanding what you meant on these various forms? Okay, wind recording, you'll have an anemometer, and there's also a compass and a little Windex. The RO may want to do this, but they also may ask you to help with this. And just make sure if you've got the type of anemometer on the left, the yellow one, it has to be carefully angled into the wind. The one on the right is a bit fancier, and it's doesn't need to be held directly into the wind, because it's a sort of 360-degree wind cups on the top of it. But the ones on the left, you have to be quite careful to angle it into the wind to make sure you're getting the real wind speed. And we do the measurements in knots, is the because it might have a meters per second or kilometer per hour or miles per hour, but try and make sure you're getting the information in knots. And when you're doing your wind reading, there's no point standing behind the cabin of the boat to measure the wind, so you need to get clear. If the boat is moored and pointing into the wind, probably you're going to go and stand on the bow to get the clearest wind. Make sure you're not near any big metal poles and things, because that can affect the compass reading. You said you're measuring the wind speed in knots, and the direction in degrees. So, you know, an 090 is an easterly wind, or 180 southerly, etc. And then we've got a wind graph for you to write this information on. And you need to do it regularly. Before racing, more frequently. Once racing started, you know, 5 to 10 minutes when you can. It's amazing how quickly time flies by, but it just helps track the wind throughout the race, which is really quite useful for the race officer. And if the race officer is busy, but if you see a particular large change, so I'd say if the wind has been consistently 10 degrees plus or minus what it had been originally, or if the speed increases by more than 5 knots or drops by more than 5 knots, you know, if you see anything significantly different, just let the race officer know, because they may have to adjust the course or change their race plan. Okay, so with the wind graph, what it does is over time, it just allows you to see what the wind is doing over time. You know, if the speed is generally increasing or decreasing, or if the wind is shifting to the right or the left. So again, who you are, where you are, and the date at the top. He's actually written the time in the wrong place, so it should actually be next to the wind speed, but it's fine. We know what he means. He's plotted the wind in knots over time, and the wind direction. So you can write a floating scale across the top. So this one, he decided to write 0 or 0, 0, 0, which is a north wind, and increments of 5 for every line to the right and -5 for every line to the left. Okay. As I said, that just builds up a picture over time of what was happening with the wind, which is really quite useful. Okay, so if you're asked to see which boats have signed on, so how many you can expect. So if you go to the individual class page, so this is for the Etchels. So under classes, you click on Etchels, and then there's an on the water button. And you click on that, and it will take you to a box where you can choose one design classes, or the other option is sports boats. And if you click on the one design classes, you can toggle on the design, you can choose impalas, and it will list all the impalas who've signed on that day. So you can see at a glance that you've got 10 out of 13 impalas has signed on for that race, so you know how many you're expecting. Okay, and this lists any of those tabs at the top with the up and down arrows. You can sort the information according to the options under those tabs. Okay, so you can sort by sail number or by class or boat name. Classes or design is the most useful. So you can have all your impalas listed as one group, followed by the J80s, etc. Okay, and if you're helping out at one of the bigger regattas, they tend to have their own regatta page, and on that regatta page, that's where you can see who signed on for that bigger race. Okay, for Middle Island and dinghy racing, so dinghies don't sign on using the top yacht system that the other classes do. Instead, they need to enter by email at least by the Friday before racing. This is so that we can see if we have enough boats interested in racing for us to send out a race management team. If we don't have enough, then racing for the dinghies will be cancelled for that weekend. So I think the magic number is about 3. And the RO will have a list of those boats, of those dinghies which have entered. But please, if you are the results officer, as the boats come out to the start, just check the sail numbers on that entry list that the race officer should have, because the dinghies are notorious for changing sail numbers. So they may enter with one sail number but actually turn up to race with another. So it's really useful if you can check who you've actually got out there and what sail number they're using. Okay. If you're not sure, you can always ask them to come over and just ask their name. And they may also be, sometimes the dinghy racing, they're coming out of Aberdeen Boat Club as well. So it's useful if we can just know who is sailing and with which sail number. And then also just to make a note of the start time for each of the races on that sign-on sheet as well. So you're prompted for this information on the sheet, but just as a reminder, the more information we have, the better, basically. Okay, so one particular, just seeing there's another question. Okay, I'll go into maybe the I flag, black flag questioning at the end, perhaps. So just stand by on that. So in your race officer bag, you'll find these last minute recording sheets. Okay, and the RO will ask one of the results officers to come and stand near them and help to write down what's happening in the last minute before a start. The RO should have a voice recorder that they're running as well, but this just provides sort of an immediate written record so that we know what's going on in that critical last minute before the start. So on this, you're looking for catching any boats who are OCS, that means on course side. They're basically over the start line before they should have been. Or if boats did not start, DNS, or if there was a general recall, or if there was an AP. So it's a record of what's happening in that last minute before the start. And for each start, you'll use a new sheet, a new last minute recording sheet. So if there is a general recall, then you get a new sheet and you write, race 1, Etchells, second attempt at the start, but we have a new sheet for each attempt of a start. And it's important to position yourself so that you can both write easily and neatly, but also hear what the RO is saying. And if you can't hear what the RO is saying and you're close to them, just ask them nicely if they wouldn't mind speaking up a little bit, just so that you can clearly write down what they've called. Okay. So at the top of the sheet, your name, where you are. So you'll obviously, for a last minute recording sheet, you'll be on a committee boat, but you could possibly be on a committee boat at the opposite end of the line if the start has 2 committee boats on it. So it's just nice to know whether you're on the main committee boat or at the pin, the opposite end. The event, or the class, so if it's an Etchells start, you'd write Etchells, date, which race number, what time the start is, and if it's, so this is the first start number 1 of race number 5, okay? If it went to a general recall, you'd move to a new sheet and it would be start number 2 of race number 5, yeah? And basically, you've got time until the start in seconds ticking down on the left-hand side of the sheet. So it's a last minute recording sheet, but you probably notice it starts at 90 seconds before. That's if there's anything particularly unusual happening, you can write that down then. But generally, the information, it's in that last minute. So once the P flag has been removed, then you're writing down what the race officer is calling. And if we look, we've got the pin end, the round ball of the black at the top of the black line. And then you've got the black line, which is your start line coming down to the committee boat. So if you imagine you're sitting on the committee boat, looking towards the pin, if you write numbers down on the left-hand side of that line, which is the start line, the boats have not yet started. If you write down numbers on the right-hand side of the line, it means they're over the start line. So if they're over the start line before the start, that's not good. So it depends where, if you're writing numbers to the left, the boats are under the start line, so they are okay. If you're writing their numbers down on the right-hand side of the line, it means they're over the line, they're in trouble, okay. For this start, so at about 60 seconds, the race officer must have called 1364 is getting close, 11, so over that sort of 60 to 30 seconds to the start, those were the boats which were standing out to the race officer. They were the ones which, if anyone was going to be over, it was probably going to be one of them. But they're all written down on the pre-start side of the line. So no one's in trouble, and it was a clear start. So if it's a clear start, just make a note, clear start on that sheet, okay? In this example, from about 45 seconds to about 15 seconds before, so remember timers, we're ticking down as we go down the page, we're getting closer and closer to the start. Those boats were all over the line before the start. And I think from memory, then this was an actual worlds. Once some go over, they all start to go over. So the decision by the race officer was general recall. Okay, so that a note was made of that. Okay, in this example, at 60 seconds, we've got boats 29 and 2 getting close. And then at about 30 seconds to go, 29 and 2 are close, and 7 has actually gone over the line. Okay. Then 7 went back, so just easily you can draw an arrow to show that 7 has gone back to the correct side of the line. And 7 was now clear. But seconds before the start, you can see, so 7 was still close, close, close. 33 and 7 were close. 33 and 7 were close. 7 is over at the start. 7 was called OCS. Okay. And then at the bottom of the page, there's a little summary box. So you can, whatever is clear, this way the person circled OCS, said that 7 was OCS, but they came back and recrossed and the time that they cleared themselves, this must have been about 30 seconds after the start. So they had basically exonerated themselves. So they're now clear. So then all clear and no OCS in the results. Okay. Okay. You may be asked to do mark roundings, which is depends which boat you're on. You might be doing mark roundings at the top end of the course, or you might be doing them at the leeward mark if you're on the committee boat and you can see the bottom mark. And we have a mark rounding or finish sheet, and you just circle which one it is. And this information is useful in case there are any boat-on-boat protests or any questions about the results. If you've got mark roundings, it helps us to go back and unpick what might have happened if there was a mistake. Perhaps boat got missed out at the finish, but you can see where they were during the race. So you might be able to go back and award them a result. So this information is quite handy. And again, you just write the date, the race number, and who you are, so that if the sailing office has questions about the information on the sheet, they know who to come back and ask about it. And then, so the race officer or the ARO will probably be calling the roundings, and they should be saying something like Etchel 1, 2, 3, 4 rounding now. So it's really useful if you write down just like an E for an Etchel or an I for an Impala. We do have in some of the fleets boats with the same cell number. I think there's a Etchel and an Impala both with the same cell number. So if they're both out there on the same racetrack, if you've written down it's Etchel 1, 2, 4, 3, then it can't be Impala 1, 2, 4, 3. Just helps us give the right information to the right boat. If you are doing these recordings, make sure you've got a clock that you can see. So the race officer, when they say now, you look at the clock and then you write down the time. You don't need to write down the hour each time unless it changes. So this one was at 1300, the first Etchel 13:05:08, and the Impala 700 came in at 05:20. So you don't need to keep writing 13 down. Okay, just make life a little easier for yourself. Now, the order of the sail numbers is the most important information to get down. Times are useful, but if there's a rush of boats, it's focus on the sail numbers rather than the times. Okay. All right. Okay, finishes, same sheet, just make it clear that you're recording finishes on it. And again, the RO or the ARO will call the finishes. And it's quite good if there are two results officers to have both of them recording independently, so that if there's a rush, hopefully between the two sets of results, you'll have caught all the boats. You'll have managed to write down all the finishes. Okay. So you can be sitting near each other, but try and do independent records. Don't sort of look at theirs to make sure yours is right at this moment. Just focus on the job in hand, and you've got time to cross-check after the race. If you start to try and cross-check during the race and during the finishes, you're more likely to make a mistake and miss something. And again, remember, for one design classes, so if it's an Etchells, we're looking at the sail number, the order of the sail numbers, rather than trying to get down every time. But it is very useful to get the time for the first boat in the fleet and the last boat in the fleet. The first boat time will let the race officer know how long that fleet took to sail that race. So they'll know whether it was, if they're expecting it to take them 45 minutes, it will give them an indication of whether they were close to that 45-minute time. And the last boat, particularly if it's their last race or only race of the day, the time of the last boat will often trigger how much time they've got to put in a protest. Okay. Okay. So sail numbers, most important. Times of first boat and last boat in the class or fleet. Fill in other times when you've got time to write them down. Except if you're recording for sports boats or dinghies, they tend to be running on handicap racing. So each boat will have a specific handicap, which will then get multiplied by the time they took to do the race. So we do need to get times for sports boats and dinghies. Okay, so we'll need times for all the boats. If we just have a sail number order, we won't actually be able to work out what we call their corrected time that they took to sail the race, and be almost impossible to give them results for that race. Again, try and write down the type of boat it was, so E for Etchell, or if it's an Optimist, to write down an Optimist, one of the kids' dinghies. And every boat that goes across the finish line, write down their result. So even if you think, oh, I think they were over early, or I think they did something funny, or just try not to think about it too much, just write down everything. We can always go back and take them out of the results. But if you think, oh, I don't think they should get a finish because they didn't start properly, and then you don't write down their finish and they actually had started properly, then we've lost that information. So write down information for everything that goes across that finish line. Maybe they'll come back and they'll cross it a second or third time for whatever reason. Just keep a record going every time they go across. And I would recommend, if you're writing down results for 3 or 4 classes, just do one continuous record. Don't try and have a different sheet for different types of boats, okay? Because if they come across at the same time or close together, you're more likely to miss some of those results if you're trying to flick between different pages. So just one long continuous list, writing down the type of boat if you can. So remember, it's sail number first, times of first and last in the fleet, and types of boats as well. Okay, so sail number first, then some time information, and then what type of boat it was. Okay. Okay, so we look at a finish sheet. So here, P516, so that's Pandora 516, and Ruffian 506. So just some examples of when we can clearly see Pandoras, Ruffians. Further down, we've got Flying 15s. Okay, and then the time. So the hour, the minute, and the seconds. Preference is to use 24-hour clock time. Just there's no confusion as to whether, yeah, 24-hour clock format is preferred. But hours, minutes, seconds. This person was very studious and wrote down 1500 each time, They didn't really need to. I think they must have got tired by the second column because they're not writing down the 1500. They're just writing down the minutes and the seconds until it changed to 1600, and then they've written that down, so it's all clear. Okay, so once the racing's done, you've got a quiet moment. If there was another results officer doing the recording as well, just cross-check with each other that you've got the same information down. If between you're not sure of something, you can always ask the RO, or you can always go and listen to the voice recording the RO has made. Hopefully that will remove any questions that you may still have. And remember, again, just if there are corrections, just cross out and write in the correct information. Try not to actually rub out the old information. And then we've got a class racing result sheet. We need to fill one out for each class, and then these sheets will get emailed to the class secretaries for them to share with their classes. So again, information at the top of the sheet, it's all pretty obvious. And each sheet has got enough space to put results for 2 races on it. So just be clear, which race it was that you're putting the information down for. If they were doing 2 races, the first race on the left, second race on the right, pretty obvious. And then at the bottom of the sheet, quite useful to have a little summary of any boats that were OCS, so started ahead of before they should have done and they didn't come back and exonerate themselves, or any boats for whatever reason were in the starting area but actually didn't start the race, so DNS. Any boats which didn't finish the race, so maybe they were out of time, or maybe they broke something, or any boat that tells you they're retiring. And it's always good to, if a boat comes up and says, actually, I'm retiring, just to clarify, is it because you've broken something and you're effectively did not finish the race, or they may be retiring because they hit another boat, or they've done something wrong and they actually want to retire from that race. So it's good just to clarify with them if they're retiring because of an incident, or if they're just broken something and they're not going to be able to finish the race, which would be a DNF as opposed to an RET. They'll get the same points generally, but it's just good to try and capture that information if you can. And then on the bottom of the sheet as well, we've got information about what the course that they were racing, what course number it was, what the wind was like, if there was significant tide, how, other information just to capture that race data, so that when we're looking at it a month later, we knew that what was going on with the wind, the course, etc. Just useful information to capture if you can. And then race officer should just have a look through the results, make sure they're happy with it, and then sign the sheet. Okay, so what do you do with that information? So for harbour racing, now we're asking if you could please take a picture of those result sheets and email it to the sailing office. And then all the paperwork that you've produced during the day. So you've got your wind sheets, your last minute recording sheets, mark rounding, finishes, results, sort of organize them by race and pop them in the race officer bag, which can then be left at the sailing office if it's still open, or down at the reception at Keller Island. So this is for the harbour racing. And if you're working at Port Shelter or Middle Island, again, take pictures of the result sheets, email them in, organise the paperwork, put in the RO bag, and the coxswains will bring the race officer bag back to the sailing office when they bring the committee boat back to Keller Island, usually on the that day or on the Monday. Okay, very important. The club gives you a little thank you. So if you've done a half day duty, you get a $50 coupon. If you've been out there all day, you get $100. And it's good for that day. So you can use it to buy a little bit of food or a drink or two, and then just go and sit down with your team to have a chat about the day, and yeah, enjoy a little bit of a little thank you from the race management committee. Just say thank you for your time. Okay, so if you are rostered and maybe you've forgotten what you signed up for or whatever, you can always go on the club website, and under sailing there is this what they call the race control and protest committee roster. You can click in and you can see what's happening when, who's on the teams, etc. Yeah. All right. So what next? Lots of smiley faces there. We see Iris and Alberti and Sheila. You've obviously, you will be asked to volunteer by your class secretaries, or you may be keen to go out there. The more you do, the better, easier it gets. Next week, I'll be running a sort of introductory club RO seminar similar to this one, where we'll go into more details about the various race officer decisions and choices to be made. And I think that's it from me. Any last questions? So I think you can unmute and ask me a question if anyone has anything.
Questions on the chat, but I'll just jump in with one of the ones I had. I don't know if I understood you correctly, that you said that we're only recording the finish of the first and last boat in each class. Did I understand that correctly?
No. So you're recording all finishes. Yeah, definitely recording all finishes. Yeah, don't, the takeaway is not only because it's
okay, good.
Okay, so it's sail numbers for all, and then times for the first and last. And if you can get times down for other boats as well, that's really useful. But you're recording finishes for all, and times definitely for the first and last in a fleet. And if you've got time to write down times for everyone, that's fantastic. The only classes where you need to write down times for everyone are those which are racing under handicap. So those will be the various dinghy classes and also the sports boat class, because they have a variety of different boats in their class. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, it does. And in the last minute sheet, there was just a few sail numbers noted. Are they just the ones that were sort of close to the start line on that particular race? We're not putting all of the sail numbers down?
They'll be the ones that the RO is talking about, because they are standing out from the rest of the fleet. They are the ones who are likely to be over. If you know, if the boats that are getting closer to the line are more likely to be the ones that will end up being on the wrong side of the line at the start.
Got you, thanks.
Okay. Okay, so Gina had a question about how many general recalls do we typically give each class before we I flag or black flag them? Okay. We could spend probably half an hour talking about this, but generally under class racing, we wouldn't be using an I flag. I flag is used for the bigger events like the Round the Island race. The I flag means if boats are over in the 1 minute before the start, if they're on the line, over on the wrong side of the line, they need to go around an end of the starting line before they can start. There is a flag called a U flag, which can be used, and if boats are over the line in the last minute, and it's actually defined, the line is the bottom of a triangle, and the first mark they go to is the apex of the triangle. If boats are in that triangle in the last minute before a start under a U flag, they're disqualified. And in a black flag, they are also disqualified, but if the race is restarted for whatever reason, they can't rejoin that start. That's quite complicated. For class racing, you would be unlikely to move to any of those flags. You could move to a U flag, but probably the classes might not know what was going on. So I wouldn't recommend it. I would just try and get the start underway again. If the line was good, if it was a fair starting line and they keep going over, then you might consider pulling out a U flag or a black flag. But generally, that's not going to happen in class racing. That's more going to happen in big fleets, like for optimists or perhaps Etchells for their class championships. Generally won't happen for the class racing, so I wouldn't worry about that at the moment, especially if you're in there as a results officer role. Okay. So hopefully that answers that. And then there's a question, can you put the orange flag at the same time as the class flag? So no, the orange flag is the attention signal, and when it goes up, it's 5 minutes until the class flag goes up. So if you're looking at it in time, the orange flag will go up 10 minutes before a start. The class flag will go up 5 minutes before the start. And that class flag is also known as the warning signal. And then the P flag will go up 4 minutes to the start. 1 minute before the start, the P flag comes down. And at the start, the class flag comes down. So it's a 10, 5, 4, 1, 0 sequence. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so Gina is asking, assuming we have enough dinghies signed on to hold a race, do we typically allow dinghies who didn't sign up to come within hail and notify the RO that they intend to race? So what I would do, I would just make a note that they are there. They can join the race and the sailing office will decide whether or not they're going to give them a result. Okay, so I wouldn't worry about making that decision. I would just record that they were there, that they took part, and the sailing office will decide whether or not they're going to let them have a result. The last thing we want you to do is to start having debates with sailors on the water about whether they should or shouldn't be racing. They haven't followed the rules necessarily, but let's not get involved in that argument. Okay, we'll let the sailing office deal with that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then Gina also asked, to exonerate from OCS, the entire boat, including bowsprit, needs to be below the line and then recross. Okay, if you look in the new rules, it's the hull that counts. It used to be all bits of the boat, including crew, etc., counted as to whether a boat was on the right side of the line or had come back to clear the line properly. It's now the hull. Okay, so if a boat has a bowsprit, the bowsprit doesn't count. It's the hull. But if you're racing on a big boat and you've got a bowsprit, if your bowsprit is over the line at the start, you're obviously very, very close to the start. And so you're in a danger zone. Okay, but it's meant to be the hull that counts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. And so similarly to if a boat with a bowsprit is over the line, they should come back, and it would be prudent for them to completely get every part of their boat onto the pre-start side of the line. They're going to be heading downwind anyway, so I don't quite see how they could still have their bowsprit on the wrong side and be clear. That I don't think that's likely to happen, if that makes sense, because they'll have to have turned around and be sailing downwind to get across the line. But technically it's the hull that you're looking at, not the sails, not the sailors, not the bowsprit. Okay, Jim asked, do we ever video starts and finishes? Yes, if it's a particularly busy race track, then it is absolutely fine to run a video. The RO will be the only one really standing on the line. So if you're videoing from slightly in front of them or slightly behind, you'll get a slightly different perspective. But it might help with sorting out close finishes. Difficult from necessarily making an OCS call, but if perhaps the RO their vision of the boats was obscured, they couldn't see the sail number, it could be useful. But in that situation, probably if the RO knows that boats are over but isn't clear who they are, they will probably call for a general recall, because you've got to make that decision quickly within 4 seconds. So you won't have time to go back and review a videotape. But you could, so I would say that video of finishes is probably more useful than videos of starts if it's looking like it's going to be busy. Okay, so I think Chloe, we've answered your question about only recording the first and last boat. So no, you're recording everyone. It's just the time of the first and last boat at a minimum. Times for all even better. And I think we've answered your question about the last minute sheet. We're recording those boats who are more likely to be close to the line and over the line. Victoria says, thank you, super helpful. Good, it makes a lot more sense now. Excellent. Yeah, okay, anyone else, any final questions?
Brenda, can I ask a question?
Sure.
OCS, if a boat finds herself to be OCS before the start, and then come back behind or below the start line, would it still be counted as OCS?
Okay, so under the P flag, so if we're using the Papa flag as the 4 minute flag, as long as the boat is below the start line at the starting signal, she's fine. Okay. If at a minute to go and we've got a P flag, so our 4 minute flag is the P flag. If at 1 minute to go, she's over the line, but then she comes back and is completely on the correct side of the line at the start, she's absolutely fine. If, however, we're using a U flag or a black flag, or indeed an I flag, but again, unusual to use those in class racing, but if she's in the wrong space before the start, so it's that for the U and the black flag, it's that triangle between the start boat, the pin, and the top mark. If she's in that triangle in that last minute, within the last 60 seconds, she cannot exonerate herself. She will be scored as U flag disqualified or black flag disqualified. For the I flag, it's a bit different. It's the line, if she's on the course side of the line, which is defined from the orange flag on the start boat to the pin end, and the line's extensions. So if you imagine you've got the line between that start, the orange flag pole, and the pin end, and then you extend those out in a straight line. If she's above those extensions or the start line, when it's an I flag that we're using as the 4 minute flag, she then will be in trouble unless she comes back around one end of the line before starting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to close the meeting now. We will have the recording available, and I'll also make the slides available to anyone who would like them. So thank you all for your time. So I am running a Club RO seminar in this time in 1 week. So some of you may have signed up, I'm not sure, but you're very welcome to join that. It would be going into more detail, as I said, into the decisions of what the RO needs to think and plan for before, during, and after racing. Okay, so thank you, and everyone stay safe. I hope this typhoon is not a problem, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.